My name is Ricardo. I am part of Zoom's customer marketing team, once again located in sunny and very beautiful today, Oakland, California. Let's take a look at what we're going to be addressing in today's webinar. We want to make sure that every single one of you has that insight, that knowledge, that sense of confidence when it comes to accommodating your participants and those who might be in person when you are conducting a hybrid online Zoom meeting. Right? So we're going to be discussing, from the spirit of a takeaway, the common challenges that people face in that hybrid meeting environment. We're going to address how you can create a collaborative hybrid environment for your meeting, for your participants that are part of that online experience with you. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about additional Zoom applications and features that enhance that meeting experience. And then again, we welcome your questions. Please send those questions to us throughout the webinar, and then I'll do my absolute best to answer those questions as they come my way. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about the hybrid meetings that are taking place as we speak, right? So what exactly is a hybrid meeting? I am positive that a lot of you understand what a hybrid meeting is. You've probably been either a host or, I'm sure, a participant in that type of an environment. But simply put, right, a hybrid meeting is any combination of people joining from either an in-person location, like an office, or of course, remote. So it's simply a combination of people joining in the online Zoom meeting environment, and then at the same time, having people in that physical aspect also in that same meeting. So we're going to be talking about a technology that we do provide in order for hosts to be able to have an online meeting in such an environment, right? Not only can we have a meeting from that online interface, but we can leverage a technology that we provide called Zoom Rooms. And Zoom Rooms provides, if you actually think about this, a Zoom Room is a physical version of the Zoom meetings that we're actually familiar with already. That allows us, a Zoom room, a configuration of such a room allows us to actually have people in person with us and at the same time host them. Much like what we see on this slide that I'm presenting to you right now, this is technically an environment of what would be a Zoom room. So more on that a little later, but let's first talk about the benefits of actual hybrid meetings, right? One of them being the efficiency of having the luxury, if you will, of an online environment, right? This enables our in-person and remote teams to be able to work collectively without reliance on solely being on site, right? Especially, we've been able to see that take place on a maximum level during this unique time that the entire world has experienced, right? The pandemic. So many people were able to not only just start to have those meetings via Zoom, but at the same time, there was still that need to have in-person meetings. So we can have a combination of both, thus a hybrid meeting. And there's that flexibility as well. So when it comes to having a hybrid meeting, there's a lot of flexibility that takes place. This allows people that are part of that session, may they be remote, may they be in the office, to actually choose the meeting location that best benefits their personal situation. I tend to work here from home. A lot of my colleagues have returned to the office at our headquarters in San Jose. I can still be part of that meeting that perhaps a colleague is hosting while on site with a couple of colleagues that are in that room with them. And of course, those who choose to remain to work remotely, I still have that ability to participate in that meeting. And I'm certainly going to depend on my colleague, my host, to include me, to provide to me a sense of inclusion, a sense of participation, and engage with not only just me in that online environment, but all remote participants in that online environment, right? We, as remote people that are joining a hybrid meeting, we want to have that sense of inclusion, that sense of participation. So we want to depend on the host, making sure that that is something that we are experiencing. So the host is what I tend to call somewhat of a lighthouse, if you will, right? We're going to talk about that in today's webinar. Of course, from a cost-effective aspect, very, very beneficial for us. It reduces the need for travel. That's definitely, especially with what's taking place, the gas prices, right? By bringing teams or employees together virtually, this is definitely going to be a major benefit for us on several different levels, right? But one of them being the the expense that it costs in order for even just me, as I live in Northern California, in the Bay Area, it will still take me, believe it or not, around, depending on time here in the Bay Area, sometimes up to 2 hours just to get to headquarters in San Jose. So think about the time that it might take, not only just me, but other people, if in fact they need to be in the office. So we've definitely seen, in a sense, a revolution, if you will, as to how people understand the benefits of being able to be a participant in an online meeting, much like all of you are, and have that luxury of participating in that meeting from your specific or preferred location, right? But naturally, in that hybrid environment, there's going to be some challenges. It's not always going to be the best situation sometimes. And naturally, we've taken the liberty to think about some of those scenarios, right? The inclusivity. A meeting environment that only favors in-person or remote attendees, if it's either or, is definitely going to be a potential challenge. As I just mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that those who are in person have a sense of inclusion, have that ability to share their ideas, but not only just with those people that are in person, with the people that are also tuning in from that remote aspect, right? From the spirit of collaboration, we want to make sure that there's tools available to us, not only, again, from that in-person aspect, but those of us who are in that remote environment. A Zoom meeting by default is meant to be interactive. It is meant to be collaborative. We all can probably attest that when we're in that meeting environment, not every single Zoom meeting is going to permit time for us to leverage all of those awesome features like breakout rooms and participating in polls or participating in a quiz. It all depends on the type of meeting that host is conducting. What features does the host want to incorporate into that Zoom meeting so that people from that remote aspect have that sense of interaction, collaboration, engagement, right? Those are key ingredients, if you will, elements that definitely allow participants to feel like they are being included into that in-person meeting as well. So rest assured, Zoom definitely provides the ability for you as a host to have or provide that inclusion feature-wise and other tips and tricks, if you will, or best practices that we'll be talking about today, right? So lack of tools to enable in-person and remote attendees to work together, that's definitely a potential challenge. Definitely distractions. I've certainly had my share, maybe at home or even at the office, right? Maybe I'm at the office and there's other people that are joining a meeting online, and there could be someone in that office space that might be typing just a little too loud. So we want to be mindful of, even though we're just in person, there's naturally people that are joining remotely. We want to think about those details and not necessarily contribute to the challenges at hand that people remotely might be experiencing. So in-person remote attendees tempted or distracted by external interruptions, I just maybe named one, and that was someone perhaps being a little too close to the microphone in that conference room, typing a little loud, which I've personally experienced, and then it can be a distraction to that person or people that are in that remote environment, right? Or the opposite. I could be one of those remote participants. Maybe you've had that experience yourself, where maybe there's some outside noise, if you will, that I'm personally experiencing within my environment, and of course that is trickling into the Zoom meeting. You've probably already discovered your power as a participant to manage your own audio, right? Again, we're going to be addressing some of these best practices, not only from a host perspective, but your commitment as a participant to not only just be part of that that Zoom meeting, but also making sure that you know how to personally manage your capabilities as that online participant, right? And of course, technology. This is an interesting aspect of a challenge in that not everyone is going to be on that best internet connection. A lot of people prefer to be on Wi-Fi while they are a participant or even hosting in a Zoom meeting. So a lack of technology that prevents an optimal meeting experience can certainly be a challenge, right? And what we also mean by that is maybe, sometimes not the best equipment. Do you have to go out and spend a fortune on the best of the best? Absolutely not. But again, we're going to be talking about some of those basic best practices that you certainly want to take into consideration, whether you be a host or a participant in that online environment, in person or remote, right? All right, so let's move a little forward and talk about 4 tips to hosting your best hybrid meeting. If you tuned in earlier, for those early birds who joined us, right, I immediately set the tone. And the way that I personally like to kick off my webinars as I host and present is I like to open up that door for you a little early. I personally do not prefer to start a meeting or a webinar at the top of the hour. I like to get started with introductions and perhaps setting the tone by my kickoff at the top of the hour. But I like to open up that session if time permits, based on schedule, of course. So I want to be mindful that not everyone has that ability sometimes to start that meeting 5 minutes early. Maybe you're coming from one meeting to another. But nonetheless, if you do have that opportunity, take that into consideration. It definitely allows people to join the session early. And you got to see that when you were joining the webinar in this case, you were seeing a slide. It was welcoming you to the webinar. We had the title of that webinar in place, and we also simply informed you by one simple sentence: our webinar will begin shortly. That is a prelude to me as your host setting the tone. I want you to have a sense of participation, engagement, and interaction. So how did I do that? Not only did I open up the door early for everyone to be able to join that webinar that you are eager to come on into with me and connect to the audio portion, but I also played some music, right? So that while you're in this environment with me, and I'm not on video just yet, I am muted, you at least see something. And at the same time, I hope that you were able to enjoy that instrumental, which I actually got to see a lot of people making comments about the music. Great music, nice song. Who is that, right? So I always get that in my webinars. But once the song ends and I introduce myself, I'm addressing those housekeeping items, right? So I let everyone know how we're going to be operating within today's session. I not only introduced myself, but I also explained the environment that we are in. Again, today we are in the Zoom webinar environment. I wanted you to understand that there's definitely a difference between a Zoom meeting interface and the webinar interface. I can't depend on every single one of my participants to understand that you are in a webinar environment compared to a Zoom meeting, right? The webinar environment provides the host the ability to host thousands and thousands, as a matter of fact, up to 50,000 people in one session. But one of the details of the webinar environment is that I cannot see you on video or hear you. So I'm going to have you leverage features that I have enabled for you. Again, setting the tone, having you understand what is being provided to you so that you can engage with me, interact, and have that sense of participation. So I informed you that we are recording. I will probably, if this was a Zoom meeting, inform you about post-meeting follow-up. And in this case, I mentioned you'll be getting an email, which will contain a link to the recording and some other resources that will be provided within that email. And I introduced myself. I did mention that I do have colleagues acting as panelists in today's webinar. They're not on video, they're not sharing any content, and their audio is muted. But nonetheless, rest assured, you're probably getting some of the answers to your questions as I speak. So on top of that, I introduced you how you can participate within the webinar. If this were a Zoom meeting, I would definitely introduce more options that I have personally decided are going to be available to you. The ability for you to raise your hand, or in the Zoom meeting environment, using the reactions option, right? The ability to utilize chat. And on top of that, I also mentioned that when you are using chat in this webinar, who you can chat with. In case you haven't discovered this, you're not able to broadcast the message where everyone can see that, right? At least in this webinar, this is a global public webinar. So we want to be mindful of how participants are able to communicate via chat. And in this case, your messages are just going to be sent to me and my fellow colleagues, panelists in the webinar. And then, of course, if this were a Zoom meeting, as your host, again, in the spirit of setting the tone, I want to make sure that you understand when you're going to be able to utilize these features. I might instruct you or inform you that in today's Zoom meeting, I have some breakout rooms set up for us so that we can workshop some ideas. We're going to be using that feature a little later, right? I'm informing you of the layout of the land, if you will, when we join a Zoom meeting. Think about doing that the next time you're hosting a meeting. It might seem, if you don't do this all that much, it might seem a little odd. It might seem foreign to you, right? But I think from that host aspect, always think about your participants. May those people be in person. or in that remote fashion, right? You want to have those people understand, how are we going to be operating within this meeting? What do you have in store for us? And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. So that's why I like to open up a meeting just a couple of minutes early to allow me that time to set that tone for the session. Of course, as the host, I always want to make sure that I'm controlling when these activities, the utilization, right, of interactive features, I want to find that rhythm. As you can see on this last point here, I want to be able to control when you're going to be able to use those items in that online environment. I'm never going to forget about you while you're in my Zoom meeting, and I also have people in person. I always want to make sure that for those who are remote, I'm going to be making sure that you have a burst of interactivity and participation by me vocalizing, okay, it's time for some breakout rooms, or it's time for this, it's time for us to use a feature, and I go ahead and enable it. When we're not using that item, I will proceed to disable it so that people are not having, in a sense, a free-for-all, right? So that people are not randomly using features in your meeting when, in a sense, you prefer that they don't, right? So always know as the host, you are in absolute power or control of that Zoom meeting. Okay, my next slide here is talking about the ability to welcome your attendees, which I hope that I did a decent job at doing that when you joined me in today's session, right? So you want to acknowledge your virtual meeting attendees, right? You always want to make sure that you're greeting them, and how you'll do that is entirely up to you. I think I would be able to say with confidence, you can certainly come up with your own formula, right, as to how you like to greet your virtual attendees. At the same time, if there's other people in that room with you, make sure that you're introducing those people as well. Make sure that everyone in both formats, in person, remote, has an idea of who is who in that online and in-person environment. Start meetings with an icebreaker. I did that for us, right? And that was just a simple one. There's definitely different ways that we can provide interaction in person as well as, of course, in that online environment. My icebreaker was a simple question: share with me where you are located. And believe it or not, chat was absolutely flooded with responses. That is one way that I can greet you. And at the same time, have you hopefully have a sense of comfort, having a sense of eagerness to share where you are located. It's not meant to be used in the spirit of data reports, or I'm not going to do anything with that information. It's just a virtual greeting, right? But there's different ways that we can have an icebreaker take place. Some people like to use chat. Some people like to just simply not be sharing content or stop sharing their material so that we can all go to a gallery view. We all wave at each other and we can vocalize an icebreaker. We tend to do that within our internal meetings from time to time to just make sure that not only can we hear each other and see each other, but again, that we're setting a tone of a form of comfort, right? A sense of, cool, things are going to be just fine, and I can't wait to participate if I'm a participant in the meeting, or I can't wait for my participants to interact with me as I host them, right? You always want to make eye contact with your virtual attendees, right? Now, in this environment, I can't see you, but notice, if you haven't already, I am constantly looking at my camera. I personally treat my lens of my camera as if I were looking straight into your eyes. Naturally, I'm going to look away from time to time as I want to make sure that I'm on point with my slides. But the majority of the time, I'm treating my camera as if I were in front of all of you, right? In the meeting environment, I'm going to do the same thing. When I speak to you, I'm looking into the camera, whereas naturally some people, and you've probably discovered this, tend to look down. They are looking at you as you are broadcasting yourself on camera, whereas you want to look in your camera. That, if you haven't figured that one out just yet, you might want to get used to that. It might feel or seem strange that you're not looking at the person on your screen, you're looking into your camera, but it is in fact making that virtual eye contact. And that is a super important detail that you don't want to overlook, right? I've seen so many times, even on TV, as I watch news and they're using, the news companies are using Zoom while they interview someone, that person is always looking down versus look into that camera. I want to see you talking to that news reporter, and vice versa, right? So don't forget to look at that camera as much as possible. Practice with that if you haven't already. Okay. I'm going to take a quick pause here just to see what questions I could immediately answer. So I'm going to take a pause here and see if there's anything immediate that I can actually answer for us. And if not, I'll just continue to forge on. Yeah. Okay, so here's a question that came in, and I'd be more than happy to help distinguish for those of you. One of my colleagues has mentioned a lot of our participants are asking, what is the difference between a Zoom meeting and a Zoom webinar? So number one, Zoom provides a portfolio, if you will, of software solutions to the world, right? One of them being a very synonymous interface with Zoom is Zoom meetings, right? But again, we are in a Zoom webinar today. So we also provide a platform called Zoom Webinars. We provide another technology called Zoom Phone. That's a soft-based phone capability, right? We provide what is called Zoom Chat, Zoom Events, Zoom Contact Center, right? So again, a portfolio of different software solutions that, of course, offer different capabilities. But all in all, what is the difference between a Zoom meeting and a Zoom webinar? So the interface that we're in today allows us, say, from a marketing team to have such a session and host thousands and thousands of people within the online environment, and we don't really manage participants like we normally would in a Zoom meeting. Again, remember I mentioned that a Zoom meeting is meant to be interactive and collaborative. So it's going to provide the capability to the participants to broadcast themselves on video and audio. Then on top of that, depending on how the host has configured that Zoom meeting, participants are going to be able to use features that the host has provided to them. The ability to participate in a poll, the ability to take a quiz, the ability to go into breakout rooms. So Zoom Meetings is equipped, if you will, with interactive and collaborative features. This webinar environment that we are in is more of like a lecture style of a theater, if you will. You come on into the session, we are evangelizing information to you, in this case, via video plus presentation, and no interaction is taking place among the participants. We want all of your attention. So we would use the webinar environment to do that. And then on top of that, of course, there's some amazing strategic features that the webinar platform provides to us in the spirit of pre-webinar, post-webinar tools that are provided in this environment. So it's a completely different ballgame. Visually, right, the interface looks and feels like Zoom meetings, but naturally, two different ball games, two different capabilities. We would use Zoom meetings in that spirit of, I want to see my participants on video. I need to see them. I need to hear them. I'm going to be having a meeting where I want interaction and collaboration to be taking place. Whereas in this case, we want to spread the word, if you will. We want to evangelize information on a specific topic, a town hall, an all hands type of an environment, a concert, a recital, right? So much more of a strategic approach when it comes to using the webinar environment compared to a Zoom meeting. So I hope that helps answer your questions on the comparisons, right? Let's go a little further and talk about another slide here. Assign an in-person meeting facilitator, right? If I am in person, and I know that my colleagues or business partners are joining my Zoom meeting in order for us to have them be a part of that session, I might want to think about assigning someone in that online environment to be my facilitator. I want to be able to cater to both, but I might have someone have that sense of empowerment because I want that person to be the lead, if you will, my facilitator for my online participants, right? Have the virtual attendees experiences at the top of your mind. Be the in-person representative for that virtual attendee. In other words, I want that facilitator to always be mindful of our online participants and have them be the champion for them, to be that lighthouse, if you will, for those people that are remote. And then from time to time, they can chime in. I can check in with that one person that I've designated as a facilitator and just check in. Mike, Tim, Taylor, tell me, what's the pulse of my remote participants, right? And maybe what I can do is have my participants send those questions like you're doing right now to the Q&A panel, or send them directly to John. Send your questions to, and then John can chime in as we have found that rhythm as to when we want to take those pulse checks and get that information across to your host, right? We can monitor the meeting chat to raise any sort of questions or comments that people are sending. We can use the raise hand features to manage virtual attendees speaking up during the meeting. again, as the host, I can really just determine what works best for this online environment, right? For now, in today's webinar, we have thousands of people in this session. If I were to pose a question to you and have you raise your hands, all of you would most likely respond to that, right? Whereas in a smaller environment like a Zoom meeting, if you're, and I apologize for not mentioning this detail, but the absolute max that you can have in a Zoom meeting when it comes to participants, and this is certainly dependent on your subscription type, is 1,000 people. Whereas in the webinar environment, 50,000 people at the absolute max. And then on top of that, I can actually stream the webinar out to YouTube, to Facebook, to a third-party streaming service of my choice, right? So I can reach, if you will, even more people from another platform. But in the meeting environment, there's definitely going to be a different style of how we are operating, right? So, for example, here's a question for you. How many of you have been in a Zoom meeting before as a participant and it wasn't the best experience? Raise your hand for me. Regardless of what that was like as far as the subject goes, or maybe someone did something or the host wasn't the best host, irrelevant, right? I just want to see a show of hands. Now, here's the detail. If we were in a Zoom meeting, you would all be able to see who's raising your hands, or I should say raising their hands. Only myself and my fellow colleagues can see who is raising their hands in this online environment. That's one of those subtle differences, again, comparing the interfaces with each other, right? So I'm actually seeing a lot of people raising their hands saying, sure, I've definitely been in a Zoom meeting where it wasn't the best experience. Now, I didn't ask what exactly that was, right? It could have been the host. It could have been a technology issue. It could have been maybe a lack of participation, a lack of engagement. It could be several different factors, right? But nonetheless, I'm personally interacting with you right now in this environment. So we're using tools, and I'm asking you to use them for me so that I can acknowledge you, right? Just different subtle forms of acknowledging my participants. So again, in that spirit of having a facilitator be assigned to your Zoom meeting, I want to make sure that I'm clear about one detail, and that is there's technically not a role that you would actually assign in your meeting environment, right? If you're familiar with that role called a co-host, think about having a co-host in your Zoom meeting. A co-host is basically going to share the same privileges that you do, or I should say that you have, but maybe you want to offset some of those responsibilities, if you will, and share the load, right? So I can promote a colleague to become a co-host, and that co-host, in a sense, is my facilitator, and I can instruct that person, monitor chat. Let's set up chat so that only participants are sending you those messages and not broadcasting where everyone can see that, so that it helps you see those questions, and then you can either provide a response, or let's take a pause. Together we'll come up on video and we'll address some of those questions and then keep us moving along. Again, finding that rhythm as to when we want to accommodate our participants and how, and what features do we want to have them utilize from time to time. Here's a couple of best practices that I've gathered up for us in the spirit of just, again, empowering you as potential hosts. And then I also want you to be thinking about this from a participant perspective, in that you want to make sure that, or at least think about what your host might want to do in their meetings, right, when they're hosting you. So, as I mentioned earlier, I like to start meetings a couple of minutes early, even if it's just 2 minutes early, right? I'm going to be hosting people online plus in person. So I want to make sure that, number one, my audio and my video is operating as needed, right? If you have never clicked on these arrows, and actually I'm going to do myself a favor for all of us, I'm going to enable my annotation option. And I like to use a spotlighter from time to time to really get your attention. See that? See how I changed my mouse over to a red dot? That helps you follow along with me, right? But I want to point out this arrow pointing up, and you can see that it is available to you on your audio as well as your video options. Why is that so important? Why is video and audio so important? Well, number one, of course, I want to be heard. I do not want to be heard, right? And I want to hear my participants when that opportunity arises where Bob, Mike, and Sarah, tell us what you have to say, or share your ideas, what have you, right? I want to make sure that everyone is able to be heard. So these options are available not just for the host, but you as a participant. Many times in my webinars, I get participants that ask, I was in a meeting and my host was telling me that they could not hear me. Now, that's a very broad situation, right? It can be a number of things. Maybe you were muted on your computer, but not necessarily muted in your audio connection via Zoom. Or maybe your microphone was not plugged in correctly. It could be a number of things. But nonetheless, the best way to troubleshoot those items independently for yourself is just clicking on these arrows pointing up. And that will get you access to your video options and your audio options in real time on the fly. You always have that ability to either switch to a different microphone, provided that you have another mic connected to your computer, right? I tend to use several mics. I'm using a headset, despite the fact that I can't hear you. My headset is a 2-in-1, so it's a microphone plus speakers, and that's what I tend to use in my webinars. But I also have a desktop microphone that I could plugged into my laptop. It's always connected, just in case for whatever reason this headset goes out on me. I'm not going to panic. I'm just going to go right to this arrow pointing up, and I'm going to connect to that extra microphone. So there's the ability for you to connect to a different microphone if need be. There's the ability for you to test your audio, and the same thing for your video. You can switch to a different camera if for whatever reason you're having an issue with the current camera. This arrow pointing up provides you with a menu to get yourself into another a microphone if need be, or a different camera. But of course, those items have to be connected to your system. So upon starting your meeting, always, as a best practice, review your audio and video configuration. As a host, remember I've mentioned several times that I want to be able to not only just have you interact, but I definitely want to control when it's time for us to interact. I do not want it to be a free-for-all for my participants. I don't want people randomly annotating on content when I prefer that you don't do that. I don't prefer that just people randomly share their content. So of course I want you to interact. Of course I'm going to include you and provide you with these capabilities, but I will determine when you are going to have access to those items. So in my security icon, and what I have on this slide is basically saying configure participant privileges as soon as possible. And another reason why I like to start my meetings and webinars a little early is to just, in my meeting environment, I'm going to go to to the security section. And this is the security section here, right? This allows me to enable or disable my waiting room, allow my participants to, and whatever is checked, they have access to, or maybe the opposite. In this session, at least for now, I'm not going to permit people to share their content until it's time to. Yes, I want you to chat, but I'm going to go right over to the chat panel. I'm going to double check your chat privileges, right? And then I'm going to determine what items I want to have enabled or disabled. The great thing about these items is that 10 minutes down the road, I can easily just re-enable or disable a feature. But I personally prefer that I set these up in advance. So as soon as I start my meeting, and then I'll start to let people into the session, right? For those of you who have your hands raised, if it's not much to ask, you can go ahead and click on lower hand, and there you go. I love that you're tuning in. But yeah, you can just go ahead and virtually lower your hand from us, right? Let me take a quick pause if you don't mind. I want to take a quick look at chat and just make sure that I'm taking a pause here to address some questions. Let's see. Yeah, we're gonna be talking about Zoom Rooms in a short while here. So I do see some of my colleagues asking about Zoom Rooms, or make sure that I cover that. So we certainly will, right? But in order for me to have those colleagues that are in person with me, and at the same time host those remote people, I definitely want to take into consideration that Zoom Room. So we'll get there. And thanks for your interest in that technology here. Just again, setting that tone at the early stages of starting my Zoom meeting, right? This is a scenario where I'm accessing the participant panel, clicking on my More button, and again, enabling or disabling privileges from the participants. And then last but not least, reviewing your chat capabilities, right? This is an awesome feature. In case you've never used this file transfer feature, right? I can have printed documents for my colleagues that are in person, but how do my remote participants get access to that doc, right? If I naturally have a soft copy and I want to make that available in real time to those online participants, this is a file transfer option. This allows you to browse in your computer system, locate that file, double click on it, and it becomes available for people to download within the chat panel. So in real time, I can get that copy. Cool. Not only does Mike over at the office have a copy and I'm not feeling left out, Ricardo's also transferred that file to me in real time in the Zoom meeting. Awesome feature. It's also available in the webinar environment too. Last but not least, if you're wondering, how did I enable that closed caption feature in the webinar? Again, this is something that a host can do. In the meeting environment, participants can actually request that the host enables that item, right? This is a free feature for every account. May you be on a free subscription or a paid for subscription. Again, the ability for you to accommodate your participants, right? So if you find, let's go ahead and enable that without people requesting that, you can do that. Or you can be reactive to someone requesting that you enable it. So there's where that box is checked. Allow participants to request live transcription in case you haven't enabled it for them. Once enabled, they can personally choose to hide their subtitles if they prefer to, right? So in this scenario, there's three options that I can select. I can assign my participants to type, which I probably wouldn't do. I can use a third-party API integration, or I can use Zoom's AI-based closed captioning, which is exactly what I'm using in today's webinar. So we want to empower our participants, right? Despite the fact that I'm the host, I know that I'm in absolute control of the meeting, but I, again, want to empower my participants to have that sense of, can you enable something for us? Or I'd like to interact. How can I do that? Chat, raise your hand, using those wonderful reactions, right? Inform participants, as we talked about earlier, how they can quietly interact, engage, offer feedback, participate. So there's your reactions options. If I click on this more option here, then that provides me with more emoticons that we can leverage. And it really just lighten things up. Depending on what emoticon has been leveraged, that will definitely maybe be a conversation starter or just some form of acknowledgement, right? So let me take a quick look at Q&A. All right, and it looks like my colleagues are really busy there, but let's start to hit the home stretch here, right? We want to designate time for questions and feedback naturally. And again, there's a good example of a Zoom room in action here, but again, just in the spirit of a best practice, right? Add breaks throughout your meeting to pause and ask for questions from both your in-person and virtual meeting attendees or from that facilitator. Maybe that facilitator, if you're comfortable with that, you can certainly tell that facilitator, anytime you want to chime in and make sure that I'm answering a couple of questions, feel free to just do that anytime you want, right? Or I can direct that and say, it's time for some Q&A. Let's take a look at what my facilitator has gathered up for us, whatever that scenario is. So a verbal cue for virtual attendees to speak up and participate is definitely a crucial opportunity for people to have, again, that sense of engagement, right? When you're in that online environment, you want to use a digital whiteboard. We're actually releasing a new version of the whiteboard. This is actually not the same whiteboard that you would normally see in a Zoom meeting when you're naturally sharing content, right? One of those options is for you to share a virtual whiteboard so that you can interact with those remote participants. This allows people to use marking up options from the annotation toolbar. This is a standalone version of the whiteboard. This allows us to collaborate either in person and as well as with virtual attendees, but we don't even have to be in a Zoom meeting to do this, believe it or not. This is coming out fairly soon. And I unfortunately don't have a release date. If one of my colleagues wants to or happens to know that, they can share that via chat, but this will be released fairly soon. And this allows us to collaborate online without being in a meeting, but then we can actually transfer that virtual whiteboard either to the Zoom desktop client, and that's what's taking place in this scenario, where within that client, we're going to have a whiteboards option, and you can actually continue to collaborate on those whiteboards via the desktop client. And then on top of that, of course, if we wanted to utilize that whiteboard in a Zoom meeting, same thing. So it's a great way to, again, have a sense of interaction and participation simply using another feature, another capability, internal or external, of your Zoom meeting. One extra detail that we wanted to make sure that we are sharing with the hosts is something to take into consideration, right? From that online perspective, which I'm not doing right now, is I am not sharing my slides as a virtual background. But this is what it would look like if you are sharing your slides as a virtual background. You're basically superimposed into your presentation. The awesome thing about that is that you can actually drag your video in another spot. So in real time, as you go to your next slide and you present and you prefer maybe based on real estate of that slide, there's some white space, or you want to move it over here, anywhere, you can actually do that. And of course, people are seeing where you are placed within your own presentation. So it definitely adds a nice touch to how you deliver your online Zoom meeting to your remote participants, but just a great way to complement what people are experiencing, right? And the way that we do that as a host is when we click on our share screen option here, we have that ability to go to the advanced section, and we simply choose to share our slides as a virtual background. And then from there, once you choose this option, you're presented with a screen that allows you to browse in your computer and pick that presentation that you want to have as your virtual background. This works with PowerPoint, right? So I don't believe that it is compatible with Google Slides, which is what I'm currently using right now. But it definitely works with PowerPoint, right? So it's a great way to just have, in a sense, an immersed version of yourself within your own presentation versus what you're experiencing right now, which is video to the right side of your screen. So let's get some interaction going, if you don't mind, right? I want to make sure, again, just because I can't see or hear you, and you've been probably busy with Q&A, let's set up another form of interactivity, and let's provide you with a poll. So give me a couple seconds as I get that over onto your screens, and I'll launch that for you. And the same questions that we see on the slide is also within the poll, but again, another way for me to provide interactivity, not only just in a webinar, but polling is also an option for Zoom meetings as well. The cool thing about the polling feature is that as you respond to that poll, right, I get to see, and number one, I will mention, it is absolutely anonymous. So in case some of you are a little shy about not participating, no need to be. I encourage you to participate in that poll, right? One thing that I've learned in my many years of presenting online is, again, being that lighthouse, being the host, I've learned that there's a way to encourage people to participate with you. You can't make someone participate with you, but you can certainly encourage them. There are certain key words, right? We get a common question in these webinars like, I'm a teacher, and some of my students are a little shy about being on video. How can I encourage them to go to video? I used to teach myself. Before joining Zoom, I used to teach classes online to young adults here in the Bay Area for a nonprofit. And I used to teach my courses over Zoom meetings. So naturally, based on that age demographic, not everyone is going to be eager, believe it or not, to be on video. And what I found was a lot of those students were shy based on their actual background. They're working from their bedroom, they're working from their kitchen, and they're just a little shy or a little embarrassed about displaying their home or their environment, not only to me, but anyone else who's in that meeting, right? That can be a super uncomfortable situation. So number one, thank goodness for our virtual backgrounds feature. But on top of that, even if that wasn't supported by that person's computer, I would still vocalize, Mike, there's nothing like seeing you on camera. I don't worry about your background. We're not tuning into that, right? I think it's how you frame to your fellow participants and who those participants are to encourage them to participate, much like this poll. Once I stated it's anonymous, I actually see those numbers go up. So on my poll panel, which I'm going to show you right now, okay, so I've closed out the poll, right? And as you are participating, I get to see all that data. Who's answering to that question anonymously? How many people are answering to answer number 1, 2, and so on, right? But let's share those results with you. So another form of interactivity is I can use this in the spirit of discussion, right? What tip or tips are you most likely to use in your next hybrid meeting? And we can see based on the numbers here, it's all over the board, but we can talk about that, right? In the spirit of time, probably not enough time to talk about every single item here, but nonetheless, right? It allows me to gauge you, and I can set up a poll and pose all kinds of different questions to you. Again, I'm the host. I want to make sure that I'm having this sense of participation from my participants and providing that opportunity for them to do so, right? So a lot of you are saying, acknowledging your virtual attendees, assign an in-person meeting facilitator, designate time for Q&A and feedback, using that digital whiteboard. Most of you, or not all of you, but a lot of you said all of the above. And if you selected other, then you are providing a long answer to me, right? So we'll see that a little later independently from this webinar, right? And I can, of course, stop share of that webinar results with you. So number one, thank you for participating in that poll. And above all, thank you for participating in the webinar as we continue on with more slides, right? That helps me understand that as your host, you're tuning into what I'm saying, and I value that very much. It is personally strange for me to I kind of underestimate myself in how much information and knowledge I actually have. But when I see that reciprocation, when I see that participation, that kind of helps me feel you're fine. You're doing just fine. People are in fact participating with you, right? And that's one way to confirm for yourself by providing that opportunity for people to participate. All right, so setting up your at-home meeting experience, right? Designate your workplace if you haven't already. I'm sure you probably already have this down. Find a spot in your home with good lighting and minimal background noise. Believe it or not, I work within the breakfast nook area in my kitchen, right? But I chose this area because it has the perfect lighting here. I not only have a desk light, but I also have wonderful windows that bring in light from outside. So it looks perfect in my personal workspace, right? I definitely eliminate distractions. If my neighbors have their gardener come over, I make sure I close those windows. I like to have fresh air coming in, but naturally that's going to be a distractor for me, and I might be a distractor to you. So temporarily mute my notifications. I close my windows if I'm on my computer and I'm sharing my desktop. I want to be mindful of that. So I'll probably turn off certain notifications from apps so I'm not having you see those details, right? I like to use a virtual background. If you haven't seen that already, I'm naturally using a Zoom virtual background. I sometimes change those out from time to time. And I certainly like to maximize my meeting screen, right? Right now, we're in a completely full screen view of my presentation. We're not in what's called a tile view or a grid view, right? I want your full attention on my content. As I mentioned earlier, I test my audio and my video. I won't preach on that one too much. I think you get that point at this state, right? And be prepared. This is something that I really, really want to make sure that I included in this presentation. Give it all of your attention. May you be the host and the participant of a session. You have agreed to be a participant in a meeting. Whether you didn't want to be in that meeting or not, or you're not the best friends with some of those people, that's okay. You have clearly been invited for a reason. You matter, right? Your host has purposely invited you to that meeting, and commit to that. And what I mean by commit is participate. When a host provides you with an opportunity to say something, or say something via chat, right? Or raise your hand because there's a question being asked, step out of your comfort zone. And same thing for the host. Provide that opportunity for your participants to interact with you, right? Let's move on to another slide here. And let's now finally talk about Zoom rooms. Definitely apologize for an image missing on this slide. That's okay. I'll use the next image in reference, right? So a Zoom room. You've heard me talk about that a couple of times in today's webinar. And remember that this is another technology that we provide as far as our unified communications as a service platform, right? Zoom Rooms is basically a software-based room system that leverages hardware appliances, kits, customizable components to create that easy-to-use experience. I want to be at home, and I can actually set up my home to be or my workspace to be what's called a Zoom room. For end users like you and I, a Zoom room makes it super simple for us to book a room if I'm at the office, start my meeting here from home, and share my content. Again, think about a Zoom room being an actual physical version of your online Zoom meeting. But this is a prime example of a Zoom room again, right? We've seen a couple of images throughout the webinar. In this scenario, we have displays. So a Zoom room is basically going to have some of the classics. That would be a display or several, high-end cameras along with microphones in that room. And the great thing about a Zoom room is that I can wirelessly share content from my computer onto those displays. And on top of that, we see in this scenario, people joining that meeting with people that are in person from a Zoom meeting. So they see us via this camera. We see them because they're broadcasting themselves on camera. High definition video as well as audio are provided in Zoom rooms. Wireless sharing. I never have to connect anything to my computer to present something to my colleagues that are in person or in that meeting from an online environment. I can easily fire up a Zoom meeting by walking into that room using this display, which is technically a controller for that room. And there's always an opportunity for me to start an instant Zoom meeting if I didn't schedule one, or start my scheduled meeting from this controller as well. So great capabilities when it comes to Zoom Rooms. Here's an awesome feature that Zoom Room provides is what is called Smart Gallery. What it will basically do is anyone who is in person will then be broadcast as an individual video to those people that are remote. Right? With Smart Gallery, Zoom will automatically sense the participants in that room and create a separate camera feed for each participant, giving those remote participants a clearer view of their in-room counterparts, right? A sense of, just an individual video because they're used to seeing gallery, and we're providing that in an in-person aspect to those remote participants, right? I want to be mindful and take another look at Q&A and just see what I can answer here. Let's hold off in the spirit of time. I'm running a little short, so let me finish up with my slides, and then we'll spend some time answering questions in Q&A, which is where we are at this stage, right? So give me just a couple of seconds so I can take a look here as to what I can answer, and I'll do my absolute best to provide you with the best response. A question that came in states, the majority of my meeting attendees will be in person with a small number attending virtually. I'm concerned that the virtual attendees may not hear all the conversation taking place in the physical room. That has been my experiences in the past. Any suggestions? Absolutely. I've definitely been a remote participant where someone is hosting a meeting in person. I, as a participant, am never going to be shy. If I want to hear my fellow colleague or that person in that physical space, I will ask them, can you please speak up or speak into the microphone? If I'm the host of that session, I will encourage everyone in that in-person scenario. We have remote participants, speak loud, speak firm, speak clearly. We have people that want to hear you. Your voice is just as important as those that are remote and vice versa. So if you are remote and you want to chime in into that conversation, same thing would apply. I hope that helps. And that's as a simple response as that is, it doesn't get any more simple than that, right? And if anyone, maybe my colleagues, or I'm going to open up chat at this case, so that if you happen to have any ideas of your own, we welcome them. So here we come with opening up chat for you. Share some of your ideas or insight on that specific response or question. I'm going to move on to another one. I'll come back to Q&A. Let's see. Can more than one panelist be on screen at the same time during a hybrid webinar? Yes, that's an awesome question. So in the webinar environment, and again, my colleagues who are acting as panelists, they're just simply not broadcasting themselves on video, right? So I'm the only one doing that. But in the webinar environment, panelists, in fact, are the only people, along with the host, that can broadcast themselves on video. You can have 100 people acting as panelists in your webinar. Not every single one of them may be needing to present. They may not necessarily need to be on audio, but if they want to be seen or the audience is asking, can you show us who your colleagues are? Then they can all broadcast themselves on video. But yes, more than one panelist can be on video. I, as the host, can set your view to be what's called gallery view or what is called speaker view, which is what we're currently at right now, just one person speaking at a time. Right. Awesome question. And then, of course, when it comes to pinning or spotlighting, yes, you can spotlight up to 9 people, at least to my knowledge, in a Zoom meeting or a webinar. And spotlighting means we want your focus on these respective people. There might be other people that are on video, but we want the light, if you will, on these respective people. So there's a spotlight option along with what is called pinning. Pinning means let's have that video fixed. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to come over to chat and see what we can have. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop your ability to send messages just so I can catch up on chat because some of you are actually sending questions via chat versus Q&A. So let's see. I'm actually going to also be providing all of you with some resources in chat in a couple of minutes before we close out the webinar. So I have gathered up some resources for us as well. But anything that is being provided to you in chat by any one of my colleagues, please click on those links. In this webinar environment that we are in, you're not able to save the content of chat or copy it. So all you need to do is click on those links and rest assured those links will launch in a separate browser for you. Okay? Let's see. If you want to make a meeting room setting, e.g. allow removed participants to return during a live meeting, The live session will not immediately be impacted by the setting change. How long does it take to be effective during the live session? Okay, so what you're asking is, the scenario is, I've removed someone from my Zoom meeting or webinar, and there's an opportunity for that person to return. The way that they can return is by simply referring back to their link, the invite, or that they originally used to get into their meeting or webinar. If you prefer that people do not return because obviously you removed someone for a reason, whatever that reason is at your discretion. But you can in fact go into the settings of your Zoom account. And if you go to the settings section on the left side of the screen and then go to your meeting settings, I believe that feature is available to you inside of what is called In-Meeting Advanced. And that would apply to webinars as well. It's in the same section, settings, meeting, In-Meeting Advanced. And then you can disable the ability for people to return to your meeting or webinar if you have removed them as the host. So that is entirely up to you if you want to have people return or not. If you go to your settings while your session is live and you make an adjustment, that will not make an adjustment in real time. That will only apply to the next meeting that you start or webinar that you start. What hardware is best used so that my Zoom backgrounds do not have me melting into the background? That's a common question, and I love that one, right? And thank you for asking that. That's a common scenario. Number one, don't throw out your computer and don't go out and buy another camera. There's nothing wrong with your computer system or your camera, and it is not a Zoom issue. The virtual background feature works in a way where it is using your CPU processor to have an image superimposed behind you, right? But if you find yourself melting, or what I tend to call blending into your virtual background, that means that your computer system is not able to fully support or process this feature. So as I mentioned, don't toss it out. Don't go out and get another camera. All you need to do is get yourself either a blue screen or a green screen. You'll need to have that screen placed behind you so that your camera then sends that back to your computer and detects that, and then is able to fully support that feature and have your image superimposed behind you, and you will not melt into your camera. I'm sorry, into your virtual background. All right. Go to support.zoom.us, support.zoom.us, and if one of my colleagues can send the URL to that in chat, there's so let me go to my next slide here, right? I want to present some resources for you, and then I'll drop those links into chat for you as well. Number one, we always want and welcome you to join us in more webinars, right? Zoom.us/events is where you can register for more webinars that myself and my fellow colleagues provide to the world. We have upcoming webinars, as you can see on my slide, that are being displayed here. Leading Authentically in the Workplace, that's taking place towards the end of the month at 10 o'clock. What's New at Zoom? Promoting Meeting Interactivity. Yours truly provides this webinar. But again, if you just go to zoom.us/events, you can certainly register for any webinar. The cool thing is, if you don't make a webinar, we still send you access to the recording so you can catch up when you have that opportunity to. This is our support site. So for anyone who's wanting to learn more about virtual backgrounds, or maybe something that we didn't necessarily cover in this webinar, right? There's a wonderful search bar. I've been using this for years. Just type up virtual background, spend some time reading that article, right? We have getting started content. We have a learning center where you can take actual training classes. We have an amazing user community. Other people around the world would answer a question that you might pose in that user community. Right? It's all here for you. We have specific articles organized for you, and of course, video tutorials. And again, back to the Learning Center, you can take, it's absolutely free. You can take live classes, you can take on-demand training courses, whatever works best for you based on your personal schedule. All right. So before we go ahead and close out here, I'm going to answer one more question or a few, and just see what else I can cover for us. Let me come back to chat, because there was some that immediately came in, and I want to make sure I can cover a few. Is there a utility to having more than one in-person facilitator? Not necessarily a utility per se, but anyone who is in your Zoom meeting can technically present. You simply want to orchestrate with them when we'll be taking turns presenting, right? Of course, if Ricardo would be a presenter in your webinar or meeting, you want to provide me with that sharing capability. So you want to go into your settings of your Zoom account. you want to go into the in-meeting basic section and enable screen sharing for participants so that I have the ability, the empowerment, right, to have you as your host bring in your content. And when it's time for me, I can bring in my content. And we basically have that ability to present. But there's technically not a role, if you will, of co-presenter or anything like that. You're basically having me be a participant and having that ability to have me share content by using that option of screen sharing. Let's see. Here's another question that came in about file transferring. Why do some of my participants tell me they cannot get the documents I send? That is a strange one. I've never personally experienced that. It might depend on what device they're actually using when they're in that meeting with you. If they don't get that document, if that were me, I would easily just follow up via email, right? So even though I'm sending something to you in the meeting, I'll probably, just to be safe, send it to you via email. My first hunch is those respective people might be on a cell phone where they're not able to download that file, or they're not properly clicking on that actual file and choosing where they want to save it onto their computer systems. So I would throw the ball back into the court and ask, tell me how you're downloading that file. Tell me your steps, and they might be able to help you discover what is that potential issue. All righty. Deborah, I appreciate your compliments very much. Very, very nice of you to say in chat. Thank you. And really my humble privilege and pleasure to be, number one, part of the Zoom family. And on top of that, have this stage to share with all of you and present information in the spirit of empowering you as hosts to empower your participants. And at the same time, have amazing meetings when that opportunity is presented to you as a host. And at the same time, right, we talked about being a participant, making sure that you commit to what a participant, or I'm sorry, a host might encourage you to be a part of in that meeting, right? So thanks for the compliments. I appreciate that. I'm going to take one more question. We'll get ready to wrap up here. We're running really short on time. How do you handle audio switching between the Zoom room and the physical room? In other words, say I set up breakout rooms on Zoom and put participants into small groups in the physical space. Shall I use earphones to join those in Zoom? Okay, so if I were to send, and that's an awesome scenario, right? Let's just say we're having that hybrid meeting and I have colleagues that are in person. They're going to go into their own physical rooms in the spirit of a breakout room. But and naturally, if I want to go out and visit them, I need to go into those rooms physically, right? And see and observe and help and contribute. But for my remote participants, I'm going to treat you the same. Only in that online environment, when I send you to your rooms, I simply will still be connected to audio so I can hear the online portion of my participants, and I would definitely join those breakout rooms. In case you didn't know this, maybe you did, but hosts are able to join breakout rooms, right? Especially in my previous life as an instructor, I used to send students to breakout rooms, and then naturally I'm going to visit every single one of those breakout rooms to ensure that, number one, they're having fun, that they are collaborating, interacting with each other, and at the same time, working on those assignments that I provided to them in the spirit of a workshop, right? So it's a best practice as a host to definitely not just send people to their breakout rooms virtually and then just put your feet up on the desk. You still want to continue to be that lighthouse in every single form, okay? But yeah, there's obviously a nuance in that. If I send my colleagues that are in person to the rooms, those remote people are not going to hear. That's okay. We're separated. But when we come back and reconvene from breakout room activity, I'm still going to engage you virtually and in person. And again, have people speak up what happened in your physical breakout room, share that with your audience in the online environment, and vice versa. Okay, let's get ready to wrap up here. We've exceeded the time, and of course we can just continue on and on, but obviously we want to be mindful of that. So here's our closer. Once again, thank you so much for carving out some time from your schedules and spending it with us in today's webinar. We certainly hope that we were able to shed some light as host to host, in how to have a successful and hopefully a memorable next hybrid meeting that you'll be hosting, right? Remember that we've recorded today's webinar. It will be provided to you in a follow-up email. And with that being said, we hope to see your names in future webinars. Thank you so much. Stay happy, healthy, as well as positive. Happy Zooming, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.